Morning, dear students. Now, actually, we are talking about British novel, and in British novel, actually, we would like to talk about Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens, as you are aware, uh, he was a very famous English writer and social critic. He created some of the world's most well-known fictional characters, and is generally regarded as the greatest novelist of the Victorian period. During his life, his works enjoyed unprecedented popularity, and by the 20th century, he was widely seen as a literary genius by critics and scholars. His novels and short stories continue to be widely popular. So, actually, he was very famous during his lifetime, and even after that, he was very popular. And he uh, uh, is basically known for his novels, actually, particularly. He is very famous for them. He was born in Portsmouth, England, and was forced to leave school to work in a factory when his father was thrown into debtor's prison. Although he had little formal education, his early imprisonment drove him to succeed. Over his early Over his career, he edited a weekly journal for 20 years, wrote 15 novels, 5 novellas, and hundreds of short stories and non-fiction articles. So, as we are aware, actually, in his career, throughout his career, he edited many journals and he wrote 15 novels also, and 5 novellas, and hundreds of short stories and non-fiction articles, lectured and performed extensively, and he was an indefatigable letter writer and campaigned vigorously for children's rights, education, and other social reforms. Generally, he is regarded as a social analyst, also social reformer, also because of his work that he did. Dickens sprang to fame with the 1836 serial publication of the Pickwick Papers. Within a few years, he had become an international literary celebrity, famous for his humor, satire, and keen observation of character and society. His novels, most published in monthly or weekly installments, pioneered the serial publication of narrative fiction, which became the dominant Victorian mode for novel publication. The installment format allowed Dickens to evaluate his audience reaction, and he often modified his plot and character development based on such feedback. For example, when his wife's chiropodist expressed distress at the way Miss Mocher in David Copperfield seemed to reflect her disabilities, Dickens bent on to improve the character with positive features. His plots were carefully constructed, and Dickens often moved in elements from topical events into his narratives. Masses of the literate poor chipped in happiness to have each new monthly episode read to them, opening up and inspiring a new class of readers. Dickens, as a matter of fact, was regarded as the literary colossus of his age. His 1843 novella A Christmas Carol is one of the most influential works ever written, and it remains popular and continues to inspire adaptations in every artistic genre. Set in London and Paris, his 1859 novel A Tale of Two Cities is the best-selling novel of all time. His creative genius has been praised by fellow writers from Leo Tolstoy to George Orwell, G.K. Chesterton for its realism, comedy, prose style, unique characterization, and social criticism. On the other hand, Oscar Wilde, Henry James, and Virginia Woolf complained of a lack of psychological depth, loose writing, and a bane of saccharine sentimentalism. The term Dickensian is used to describe something that is reminiscent of Dickens and his writings, such as poor social conditions or comically repulsive characters. Dickens' biographer Claire Tomalin regards him as the greatest creator of character in English fiction after Shakespeare. Dickensian characters are amongst the most memorable in English literature, especially so because of their typically whimsical names. The likes of Avenger Scrooge, Tiny Tim, Jacob Marley, Bob Cratchit, Oliver Twist, The Artful Dodger, Fagin, Bill Sikes, Pip, Miss Havisham, Sidney Carton, Charles Darnay, David Copperfield, Mr. McIver, Abel Magbich, Daniel Quilp, Samuel Pickwick, Beckford Squares, and Uriah Heep are so well known as to be part and parcel of British culture, and in some cases have passed into ordinary language. Scrooge, for example, is a miser. So his characters have been so popular that they have gone into the hearts and minds of the generations. They have gone into the ideas and thinking of the people of England. His characters were so memorable that they took on a life of their own outside his books. Gamp became a slang expression for an umbrella, from the character Mrs. Gamp, and Pickwickian, uh, Pecksniffian, and Gradgrind all entered dictionaries due to Dickens' original portraits of such characters, who were respectively quixotic, hypocritical, and vapidly factual. Many were drawn from real life. Mrs. Nickleby is based on his mother, though she didn't recognize herself in the portrait. Just as Mr. Micawber is constructed from aspects of his father's rhetorical exuberance, Harold Skimpole in Bleak House is based on James Henry Lehan. His wife's dwarfish therapist recognized herself in Miss Moshier in David Copperfield. Perhaps Dickens' impressions on his meeting with Hans Christian Andersen informed the delineation of Uriah Heep. Virginia Woolf, a very important writer, maintained that we remodel our psychological geography when we read Dickens. So this was his actually image among the writers, among the critics, and among the literary people in England, as he produces characters who exhibit not in detail, not accurately or exactly, but abundantly in a cluster of wild yet extraordinarily revealing remarks. One character vividly drawn throughout his novels is London itself. So London has become a particular character in the novels of Charles Dickens, and it is portrayed and picturized in such a manner that it is a special kind of thing in his novels. From the coaching inns on the outskirts of the city to the lower reaches of the Thames, all aspects of the capital are described over the course of his body of work. Great Expectations is Charles Dickens' 13th novel. Because Great Expectations is in our syllabus, so we would like to discuss about Great Expectations in detail, about its plot and story and characters, everything. So actually it was his 13th novel. It is his second novel after David Copperfield to be fully narrated in the first person. So it is actually fully narrated in the first person, and it was the second actually after David Copperfield that was narrated in the first person. Great Expectations is a Wilden Roman or a comic of age novel, and it is a classic work of Victorian literature. It's a kind of classical work. It is a very famous work of Victorian literature. It depicts the growth and personal development of an orphan named Pip. So this is a kind of, you see, a story of development of an orphan whose name was Pip. The novel was first published in serial form in Dickens' weekly periodical all the year round, from 1st December 1860 to August 1861. In October 1861, Chapman and Hall published the novel in 3 volumes. Dickens originally intended Great Expectations to be twice as long, but constraints imposed by the management of all the year round limited the novel's length. The novel is collected and dense with a conciseness unusual for Dickens. According to G.K. Chesterton, Dickens penned Great Expectations in the afternoon of his life and fame. It was the penultimate novel Dickens completed, preceding Our Mutual Friend. So this is how actually it went. It is set among the masses of Kent and in London in the early to mid 18th century. The novel contains some of Dickens' most memorable scenes, including its opening in a graveyard when the young orphan Pip is accosted by the escaped convict Abel Magwitch. So the actually novel Great Expectations has got some of the very, very important scenes, some memorable scenes that have been created by Charles Dickens actually, and one of them is Graveyard, that is there. Great Expectations is a graphic book, is a kind of graphic book full of extreme imagery, poverty, prison ships, barriers and chains and fights to the death. So those things actually that are narrated in the novel extensively. The novel received mixed reviews from critics upon its release. Thomas Carlyle spoke of all that Pip's nonsense. Thomas Carlyle spoke of all that Pip's nonsense. But later, George Bernard Shaw praised the novel as all of one piece and consistently truthful. So later on, actually, G.B. Shaw, one of the very important writers, he actually said that it was one of the important pieces of literature. Dickens felt Great Expectations was his best work, calling it a very fine idea, and was very sensitive to compliments from his friends. Bueller, who has been, as I think you have, extraordinarily taken by the book. So, Charles Dickens liked the novel very much, and he said that it was a very fine idea, one of the best works he created. Great Expectations has a colorful cast that has entered popular culture. The capricious Miss Havisham, the cold and beautiful Estella, Joe, the kind and generous blacksmith, the dry and psychopathic Uncle Pamblehoke, Mr. Jaggers, Bemek with his dual personality, and the eloquent and wise friend Herbert Pocket throughout the narrative. Typical Dickensian theme emerged: wealth and poverty, love and rejection, and the eventual triumph of good over evil. Great Expectations has become very popular and is now taught as a classic in many English classes. So as we were talking, my dear friends, it has become a very popular piece of writing, and it has become a classic. It has been translated into many languages and adapted many times in film and other media. So this is his popularity, as a matter of fact. So as far as characters are concerned, we would like to discuss them according to the group actually. So first of all, we go for Pip and his family. Philip Pirrip, so nicknamed Pip actually. His name has been nicknamed as Pip, and he was an orphan and the protagonist and narrator of Great Expectations. In his childhood, Pip dreamed of becoming a blacksmith like his kind brother-in-law, Joe Gargery. At Satis house, however, he meets Estella, a contact which destroys his peace of mind. He tells Biddy that he wants to become a gentleman. As a result of Macbeth's anonymous patronage, Pip travels to London and becomes a gentleman. Pip assumes his benefactor is Miss Havisham, and discovering that his true benefactor is a convict shocks him. Joe Gargery, Pip's brother-in-law and his first father figure. He is a blacksmith who is always kind to Pip. He is a blacksmith who is always kind to Pip, and the only person with whom Pip is always honest. So he is the only person with whom Pip is always honest. Joe is very disappointed when Pip decides to leave his home and travel to London to become a gentleman rather than to be a blacksmith. So actually Joe was not very happy actually when he came to know that Pip was leaving the place. Mr. Joe Gargery, Pip's hot-tempered adult sister, who raises him after their parents' death, but constantly complains of the burden of raising Pip. Orlick, her husband's journeyman, attacks her, and she is left disabled until her death. So these are actually another very important characters of Pip and his family. Mr. Pamblehoke, Joe Gargery's uncle, an officious bachelor and corn merchant. While holding Pip in disdain, he tells Mr. Joe, as she is widely known, how noble she is to raise Pip. She usually tells Mrs. Joe, as she is widely known actually, how noble she is to raise Pip. As the person who first connected Pip to Miss Havisham, he claims to have been the original architect of Pip's precious fortune. Pip despises Mr. Pamblehoke, as Mr. Pamblehoke instantly makes himself out to be better than he really is. When Pip finally stands up to him, Mr. Pamblehoke turns those listening to the conversation against Pip. So that was the character of Mr. Pamblehoke. Miss Havisham and her family. So that is the another group actually of characters that is there in you see Great Expectations. Miss Havisham, Belle the spinster who takes Pip on as a companion for her adopted daughter Estella. She is a Belle the in spinster actually. Embittered after being jilted at the altar by her fiancé some years before, Havisham is an eccentric woman who perpetually wears her wedding dress. She conceives a hatred for all men and plots to wreak a twisted revenge by teaching Estella to torment and spurn all men, including Pip, who loves her. Estella, Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, who, whom Pip pursues throughout the novel, Estella represents the life of wealth and culture for which Pip strives. Since Miss Havisham ruined Estella's ability to love, Estella cannot return Pip's passion. She warns Pip of this repeatedly, but he will not or cannot believe her. Estella does not know that she is the daughter of Molly, Jagger's housekeeper, and the convict Abel Mackwich, given up for adoption to Miss Havisham after her mother was arrested for murder. Matthew Pocket, Miss Havisham's cousin. He is the patriarch of the Pocket family, but unlike her other relatives, he is not greedy for Havisham's wealth. Matthew Pocket tutors young gentlemen such as Bentley Drumple, a startup Pip, and his own son Herbert. Herbert Pocket, the son of Matthew Pocket and Miss Havisham's presumed heir. Pip first meets Herbert as a pale young gentleman who challenges Pip to a first fight at Miss Havisham's house when both are children. He later becomes Pip's friend. Herbert Pocket actually later he becomes Pip's friend. Cousin Raymond, an aging relative of Miss Havisham's, who is only interested in her money, he is married to Camilla. Georgiana, an aging relative of Miss Havisham, who is only interested in her money. She is one of the many relatives who hang around Miss Havisham like files for her belt. Sarah Pocket, another aging relative of Miss Havisham, described as a dry brown, corrugated old woman with a small face that might have been made out of walnut shells and a large mouth like a cat's without the whiskers. The convict, an escape from a prison ship, from Pip treats kindly and who turns out to be his benefactor. His real name is Abel Magbich, but he uses the aliases Probus and Mr. Campbell. Mr. and Mrs. Hubble, simply folk who think they are more important than they really are. They live in Pip's village. So they are also the characters. Miss Havisham and her family, some other character, Mr. Bobsell, clerk of the church in Pip's village. He later gives up the church work and moves to London to pursue his ambition to be an actor, adopting the stage name Mr. Baldwin Garber. Biddy, Bobsell's second cousin. She runs an evening school from her home in Pip's village and becomes Pip's teacher, a kind and intelligent but poor young woman. She is like Pip and Estella, an orphan. She is an orphan. She acts as Estella's foil. Orlick was attracted to her, but she did not return his affections. Pip ignores her affections for him as he fruitlessly pursues Estella after realizing the error of his life choices. Pip pretends to claim Biddy as his bride, only to find out she has married Joe Gargari. Mr. Jaggers, prominent London lawyer who represents the interests of diverse clients, both criminal and civil. Mr. Jagger and his circle actually, they are other characters from Mrs. Havisham family. So he was a prominent London lawyer who represents the interests of diverse clients, both criminal and civil. He represents Pip's benefactor and Miss Havisham as well. By the end of the story, his law practice links many of the characters. John Bamick, another character. Jaggers' clerk called Mr. Bamick and Bamek except by his father, who is referred to as the aged parent, the aged P, or simply the aged. Bamek is Pip's chief go-between with Jaggers and looks after Pip in London. Mr. Bamek lives with his father in John's Castle, which is a small replica of a castle, complete with a drawbridge and moat in Balworth. Molly, Mr. Jaggers' maid servant, whom Jaggers saved from the gallows for murder. She is revealed to be Macbeth's estranged wife and Estella's mother. And Compeyson, a surname a convict, and Macbeth's enemy. In some editions of the book, he is called Compey, a professional swindler. He was engaged to marry Miss Havisham, but he was in league with Arthur Havisham to defraud Miss Havisham of her fortune. He pursues Abel Macbeth when he learns that he is in London, and drowns when grappling with Macbeth. He falls into the Thames. Dolls, Orlick journeyman, blacksmith at Joe Gregory Fairs, strong, rude, and sullen. He is as churlish as Joe is gentle and kind. He ends up in a first fight with Joe over Mrs. Gargery's taunting, and Joe easily defeats him. This sets in motion an escalating chain of events that leads him to secretly injure Mrs. Gargery and try to kill Pip. The police discover and arrest him. Bentley Drummle, a coarse, unintelligent young man from a wealthy noble family. Pip meets him at Mr. Pocket's house. As Drummle is also to be trained in gentlemanly skills, Drummle is hostile to Pip and everyone else. He is a rival for Estella's attentions and eventually marries her and is said to abuse her. He dies from an accident following his mistreatment of a horse. Clara Barley, a very poor girl living with her gout-ridden father. She marries Herbert Pocket near the noble's end. She dislikes Pip at first but eventually warms to him. Miss Skiffins occasionally visits Bamek's house and wears green gloves. She changes those green gloves for white ones when she marries Bamek. So here we go for summary, my dear friends. This is the summary of Great Expectations. On Christmas Eve around 1812, Pip, an orphan who is about 7 years old, encounters an escaped convict in the village churchyard. While revisiting the graves of his mother, father, and siblings, the convict scares Pip into stealing food and a file to grind away his shackles from the home he shares with his abusive older sister and her kind, passive husband Joe Gregory, a blacksmith. The next day, soldiers recapture the convict while he is engaged in a fight with another convict. The two are returned to the prison ships from which they escaped. Miss Havisham, a wealthy spinster who wears an old wedding dress and lives in the dilapidated Satis house, asks Pip's uncle, Pamblehook, who is actually Joe's uncle, to find a boy to play with her adopted daughter Estella. Pip begins to visit Miss Havisham and Estella and falls in love with Estella as Miss Havisham encourages him. Pip visits Miss Havisham multiple times. Joe accompanies Pip for the last visit. Later, when Pip had set out learning Joe's trade, an apprentice blacksmith, an unknown person attacks Joe's wife, leaving her with an unintelligible speech and disturbed vision. Biddy arrives to help with her care and becomes a blessing to the household. Whilst Pip is still apprentice at Joe's forge, a lawyer, Mr. Jaggers, approaches him and tells him he is to receive a large sum of money from an anonymous benefactor and must immediately leave for London, where he is to become a gentleman, assuming that Miss Havisham is his benefactress. He visits her at Satis house to say goodbye before he sets out for London. Pip sets up house with Herbert Pocket at Bernard's Inn. Herbert tells Pip the circumstances of Miss Havisham's romantic disappointment, her jilting by her fiancé. Pip goes to Hammersmith to be educated by Mr. Matthew Pocket, and gets money from Jaggers to set himself up to reflect his enhanced social status. Joe visits Pip at Bernard's Inn at Miss Havisham's request. By Joe, Pip visits Satis' house and meets Estella again. Pip and Herbert exchange their romantic secrets. Pip that he adores Estella, and Herbert that he is engaged to Clara. Pip meets and escorts Estella in London. Pip and Herbert build up debts. Mr. Joe dies and Pip returns to his village for the funeral. Pip's income is fixed at £500 per annum when he comes of age at 21. Pip takes Estella to Satis' house. She and Miss Havisham quarrel. At Assembly Ball in Richmond, Estella leads on Bentley Drummle. Abel Mackwich, the convict he helped, who was transported to New South Wales, where he eventually became Baldy, reveals himself to Pip as his benefactor. Magwitch has wanted to return to see Pip and the gentleman he has become, yet is cautious as he fears he will be hanged as a written transport if he is caught. Pip and his friends Herbert pocket and Startop hatch a plan for Magwitch to flee by court. Pip tells Miss Havisham that he is unhappy. He is as unhappy as she can ever have meant him to be. He asks him to finance Herbert Pocket. Estella tells Pip she is to marry Bentley Drummle. Miss Havisham, questioned by Pip, tells him that Estella was brought to her by Jaggers, aged 2 or 3, in the midst of her depression and remorse. Miss Havisham accidentally sets her dress on fire. Pip saves her, but she eventually dies from her injuries, lamenting her manipulation of Estella and Pip. Jaggers tells Pip Estella's true story. A few days before they escape, Joe's former journeyman, Orlick, who was responsible for the attack on Mrs. Joe, attacks Pip. Herbert Pocket and his friends save Pip and prepare for the escape. During the escape, Magwitch kills his enemy, Compayson, a con artist and Miss Havisham's fiancé. Police capture Magwitch and jail him. Pip visits a deathly ill Magwitch in jail and tells him that his daughter Estella is alive. Barely alive, Magwitch responds with a squeezing of Pip's palm and died shortly after, but before his execution. Pip has fallen ill. When he is confronted with arrest for an unpaid debt, he awakens to find Joe has come to his rescue. Joe nurses Pip back to health and pays off the debt. Pip realizes that in his fruitless pursuit of Estella and wealth, he has callously ignored Joe. Realizing the error of his ways, Pip pretends to propose to Biddy, a friend from his childhood in Kent, only to find that she and Joe have just married. Pip asks Joe for forgiveness and Joe forgives him. As Pip has lost his fortune upon Magwitch's death, he is no longer a gentleman. Pip promises to repay Joe and goes to Egypt, where he shares lodgings with Herbert and Clara and works diligently as a clerk. 11 years later, Pip visits the ruins of Satis' house and meets Estella, whom her dead husband Bentley Drummle had abused. She asks Pip to forgive her, assuring him that misfortune has opened her heart and that she now empathizes with Pip. As Pip takes Estella's hand and leaves the ruins of Satis' house, he sees no shadow of another parting from her. The eponymous Expectations refers to its Victorian definition, a legacy to come. So, as a matter of fact, the word expectation, as far when we talk about the themes of great expectations, actually, so first of all, the word expectation is very much concerned. And actually, when we try to give the Victorian definition, it means a legacy to come. The title immediately announces that money plays an important part in the novel and its theme, but is only part of a broader package whose coherence John Hills Miller highlights in his book, Charles Dickens, The World of His Novels. So, actually, there is something that has to come, actually, that is going to come. That is what the title means, actually, expectations. And that's what it suggests. So, actually, that is a kind of legacy to come. So, that is one of the important themes, actually. And another one is exclusion and hope. John Hills Miller first shows that, as in many Dickensian novels, most characters, and in the beginning, the protagonists are outcasts, living in insecurity. So most of the protagonists, that has been the case actually with the you see characters, with the characters of Dickens actually. So they are living in a kind of insecurity. Thus, Pip, orphaned, grows up in a world full of sinister tombs, dangerous swamps, and threatening masses of prison ships emerging from the fog that dominate the shores. So this is what has been actually the case usually, and this is what is the case with Pip also in this novel, Great Expectations. Yes, so his existence reapproaches him. I was always treated as if I had insisted on being born in opposition to the dictates of reason, religion, and morality. So that's what actually you see. This is what is the problem with him actually. So this is how he goes always. And Great Expectation is written in first person, as we were discussing in the introduction, and uses some language and grammar that has fallen out of common use since its publication. The title Great Expectations refers to the great expectations Pip has of coming into his benefactor's property upon his disclosure to him and achieving his intended role as a gentleman at the time. Great Expectations is a kind of Baldergon's Roman, a novel depicting growth and personal development, in this case of Pip. Some of the major themes of Great Expectations are crime, social class, empire, and ambition. From an early age, Pip feels guilt. He is also afraid that someone will find about his crime and arrest him. The theme of crime comes into even greater effect when Pip discovers that his benefactor is in fact a convict. Pip has an internal struggle with his conscience throughout the book. Great Expectations explores the different social classes of the Georgian era. Throughout the book, Pip becomes involved with a broad range of classes, from criminals like Macbeth to the extremely rich like Miss Havisham. Pip has great ambition and demonstrates constantly in the book. So this is how the novel goes, my dear friends, actually, and this is a very memorable story of book. I think you must have understood the idea. Thank you.